Hi, I'm Sarah from Crafty Sew&So, and today I'm going to show you how to easily thread up your overlocker. Many machines will include these spool pin converters, which will allow you to use large spools of thread on your overlocker. If you're working on a particularly large project, you might choose to use the large spools, or if you tend to use a particular colour a lot, it's well worth investing because the loopers will use a considerable amount of thread. You can, however, just use normal polyester thread. To do so, remove the spool pin converters and pop the spool on like so. Bring the thread up from the back, taking it through to the front at point number 1 and through from the back to the front at point number 2, then thread through point number 3 and all the way down through the tension dials. Continue to thread up your machine with all your threads. Machines can be used with 3 threads or 4 threads. 3-thread overlocking allows you to create a neat finished edge to finish off your raw edges. 4-thread overlocking will create a secure overlock stitch which will hold together seams and is ideal for sewing jersey fabrics together. Here are the tension dials. As you can see, each thread is defined by a different colour on this machine, which makes it even easier to thread up. On the side of the machine you have your wheel. Use this to move the needles to the correct position for threading up. When the line on the wheel aligns with the marking on the side of the machine, the needles are in the correct position for threading up. Following the colour guide and the diagrams on the inside of the machine, work through from points 5 to 11, taking care to make sure the thread passes through exactly the points as shown on the diagrams. The blue thread that we're looking at now is threading the lower looper. This thread goes through point number 5, then points 6 and 7 are these metal hooks, then pass the thread up through to hook number 8. At this point you'll need to move the lever at number 9 to the right. You'll notice that the lower looper will move into a more accessible position. On the lower looper there is a little triangular shaped metal hook. You will need to wrap the thread around from the underneath to the top of this, pulling it till you feel a slight click as the thread secures into place. You'll then need to put the thread through the looper eye. You may need to trim the thread in order to do this, to make sure you haven't got any fuzzy ends, and a pair of tweezers also comes in handy until you've got used to this slightly fiddly technique. Once you've threaded the lower looper eye, just place the thread down. Continue to thread up the upper looper. This is shown in green on this machine. Make sure you're taking the thread through step 5 and 6, ensuring you only go through one of the metal hooks at step 6 for this thread. You'll then need to thread the eye of the upper looper. Hold the needle threads out of the way before closing the lower compartment. We're now going to thread up the top needles, starting with the right hand needle. Take the thread up and around the path, ensuring that it passes to the right of the metal thread splitter. Take the thread around the hook on the needles and then trim your thread to a point before threading the needle. Again, this fiddly technique is made a lot easier with a pair of tweezers. Pull the thread to the back of the machine and check to ensure the thread is not twisted. Repeat with the left hand needle, taking the thread along the thread path, through the hook, above the needle, before trimming and threading the left-hand needle. Pull the thread to the back of the machine again and take both needle threads and bring them underneath the foot, going between the gap in the foot and the knife, and pull the threads to the back of the machine underneath the foot. Next, bring the presser foot lever down and stitch to check that your threads have combined properly to create a chain. Snip the chain short and you're ready to sew. We always recommend you do a test run before using your machine on your fabric. By aligning the edge of the fabric with the line on the needle plate, you will ensure that you stitch only over the edge of the fabric and don't remove any of the seam allowances. This is especially important when you're just finishing off the edges of the fabric and not wanting to reduce your seam allowances. Always make sure that you sew a long test piece of your fabric to check for stretching, consistency of stitching and tension. At the end of your stitching, continue stitching off your fabric to create a chain before snipping halfway between your fabric and your needle. Always leave a chain coming out of your machine at the end of your stitching. This is the back of the fabric, and these stitches are created by the lower looper, as shown here in blue. The stitches at the front are shown in green, and these are created by the upper looper. If there are any inconsistencies with the stitching or any very loopy threads, you would need to change the tension dials of the lower and upper looper to fix these. Increasing the tension tightens the stitches, whilst decreasing loosens them. You can see here that there are 2 rows of stitching that also run along the overlocking stitch. These are created by the needles. They are 2 rows of straight stitching. The pink stitching is the right hand needle and the yellow stitching is the left hand needle. If you do find that whilst you're stitching your chain becomes unthreaded, you will have to rethread the bottom threads. The best thing to do in this situation is to pull the threads out all the way to point number 5 at the bottom of the machine. Snip your threads short so that you don't have any long threads tangling, and working from right to left, rethread the machine. More often than not it will be the lower looper which has become unthreaded, but you can't simply rethread the lower looper. You must always rethread the lower and upper looper. You don't need to rethread the needles, but you will need to move the thread from the needles out of the way to avoid tangling. Threading an overlocker can seem daunting with 4 threads to contend with, but like many things, practice makes perfect, and I would encourage you to keep practicing, and soon you'll really feel like you know your overlocker. In our next video, I'll be showing you how to troubleshoot tension issues on your overlocker. I hope you found this video useful. Please join us for more. Until then, happy sewing!